Hi, welcome to the Hamilton Wood Type Shop. I'm George.
I'm Jen Ann.
We have been working together now for actually just a couple of months. Have we known each other much longer than that?
November last year.
So just a little, like about 10 months,
Yeah.
right? But we've begun working together closely because I went ahead and applied for a grant with the Wisconsin Arts Board to with purpose of training someone as my replacement here at the Wood Type Shop. And Jen and I had many long discussions about that, and she has agreed to do that. And we've been working together since July.
Yep, thanks to the Wisconsin Arts Board
Yes,
and the Folk Arts Apprentice Program. I am the apprentice. She is the master. Master of wood type.
Yes. Jen has very raw knuckles from where I've got to, as the master rapper.
That one is from.
Okay, that's not true. But anyways,
George, why didn't you talk about why you're qualified to be a master at wood type?
Well, they call me a master at wood type, but it's just because I do it all the time. But I'm here because my dad used to do this. He ran the wood type shop at Hamilton's for quite a few years. He was not specifically a type cutter, but he knew every aspect of what it was to run the wood type shop. I was actually trained on the Pantograph by Mardell Dubeck, the last Pantograph operator at Hamilton's. So she taught me the intricacies of how to use this machine. But my dad, pretty much up until the day he passed away, we were still picking his brain about all the different aspects of what it was to run the wood type shop. So while Mardell only knew this inside and out, I, as the only person that was ready, willing, and able to carry on the Hamilton tradition of cutting wood type here in Two Rivers, have learned how to process the wood type or the wood before we cut it into type, how to use the saws, how to run the pantograph, how to do the trimming. So I've had to learn how to do everything. And Jen, as daunting as that task sounds, has agreed to take on that task. You didn't
I've agreed to start learning. Every time you say, well, you know this now, it's not equivalent to you, because how many years have you been doing this, George?
Well, let's see.
Are we into double digits yet?
No, we're not into double digits.
Are we near double digits?
No, we're not near double digits. I was taught on how to use the pantograph back in 2014 to 2015, so It's really only been like 5 years.
Well, only 5 years.
But I also
I'll talk to you in 4 more years, George. 4.5 more years.
But I have volunteered at the museum much longer than that. So anyways, so how is it going otherwise, the learning process?
Yeah, it is going really well. I think what's interesting about you and I is we are printers as well as learning. We were printers maybe before, I don't know if you were, but I was before I learned the type cutting process. And someone like Mardell or your dad, I think they were not printers, which is nothing against them, but it just gives you a kind of different, a longer chain of awareness of when you're working with these letters and making prints with them. And you might be then, once you learn this, you're thinking about what goes into cutting them and making them different shapes, or printing with a historic collection that Hamilton has in the classroom. You know, you're able to see, like you have mentioned to me before, how could you have a 12-point, Gothic A, and it's 12-point, and it's not condensed, and it's not extended, but they're a little bit different 12-point A's from different type cutters of different sources of maybe wood type through the years. You get a better understanding of that when you've printed it, and then also when you've cut it and trimmed it. And that's fascinating to me.
Well, I mean, first of all, my dad was a printer.
Oh, he was?
He owned a print shop, and I think that when he was hired at Hamilton's, I think the fact that he was a printer greatly helped him understand the wood type making process. And I find that being able to print also greatly helps me to understand what is needed in the end product. I'm not a very good printer. I mean, who's that school of bad printing somewhere? It's probably more where I am. But still, it helps you understand what it is you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
So, but speaking of not being printers, though, while Hamilton's did have a print shop, the people that worked in the wood shop, for the most part, did not see their product printed for them. And when they got when they got work orders in, while the name was may have been on the order, mostly they were concerned with the style number and where the location was, and the name of the font was irrelevant to them. So as long as they could find it and they could find what sizes they had, that was all that was relevant to them.
Sure.
So the wood type making process is a very long, detailed process. We start with, the gold standard for making wood type is end grain maple. Back in the day, I'm talking about way back in the day, there were many like rock/sugar maple trees in the Two Rivers, Manitowoc, northeast Wisconsin area. Hamilton's used a company out of Algoma, the Algoma Lumber Company, to harvest their wood in the spring for them. That is a process that I shared with Jen. We have some documentation for that someday we would love to try that.
Yeah, I told her I wanted us to go and chop down a tree and hack it up and dry it, but we had to start a little bit later than that.
Yes, I mean, someday we will actually, get some raw wood and do what the instructions say, but that's a ways away. But end grain maple is, like I said, the gold standard for making wood type. And the reason it is, I have a little device here that I show to all my people. This is a little, sort of like a demonstration of wood end grain maple. If you put it on the side like this, you see that there's some give. And it's still pretty sturdy when you have like maple floors. But when you turn your end grain maple on its side, or take this as end grain maple, you push down on it, it has a lot of strength to it. And so that strength allows the printing presses, the rollers and the plates to, the wood type to withstand over many, many printings and many years of use, if you take care of it, that is. And so once we have the wood grain, maple harvested, sanded, then what Jen and I did this summer was we spent a lot of time processing this. So why don't you detail what the process was for that?
So we had raw maple half rounds, which is kind of the back. I mean, they were real rough and raw, and some of them even still had the bark on. So I think we sanded, and then we shellacked. The back gets shellacked once, the front, which is the printing face, gets shellacked twice.
Right.
And then after the shellacking, it gets polished with a steel wool, and in between, there's like a special process of drying and airing out so that it's all dried evenly. Because, it still is wood, it's dried and it's cut down, but, it still wants to react to moisture and everything. And I think am I missing anything before it gets cut to line height?
Well, if you could talk about what we would probably reject on this thing. But when we say sanding, it's a two sanding process where we do a 220 grit sandpaper, and then we do a 600 grit sandpaper on there so that when it's done, it is super smooth.
Yep.
And very slippery.
One thing I thought was interesting, because another thing I think was cool is that both George and I, even though we appreciate the wood for its ability to print, we're also big nature supporters and nature lovers, so we like the trees. And one thing I like about working with George is she's very protective of the wood, because this actually is historic wood from the Hamilton collection there. And one of the things that you pointed out to me is, as we would go through the half rounds, some of them would be this big, And you said, you called my attention to it and you said, hey, this is big enough, it's probably old growth maple. You know, we don't see that as much anymore, and these lines in here are from it being tapped for syrup, which is cool to look at. But as George mentioned, you can see this one is coming out. So while there still are many good portions of usable wood for type, we would definitely reject this area. If you get in real close, you can see cracks in this area.
And they call the heartwood over here.
Yeah, and that tends to not be as good because it's just less stable. And anything that's going to have a break in the surface like that is not going to hold up over time, and it's not going to hold the ink evenly either. This we would probably start to cut into and see if it was.
Yeah, I think we might. You'd run your finger over it and see if it was
Yeah, if it's
smooth, and if
smooth.
it seems like it's, according to my dad, if it seemed like it was solid, hey, they would use it. So if you have any wood type that has weird stuff like that in it, that is entirely possible that it was tapped at one time.
And you have all kinds of other uses for the ends. We've given those to wood engravers. We've
That's true.
cut them down smaller and smaller for smaller type. The wood is precious, and we treat it that way.
Well, in this one, you can probably fit, if it's a bigger type, you probably have this much, maybe this much room here.
Sure.
To cut, 12 line, 18 line.
Yeah, like
But when
fit in there.
Yeah, but when
pretty
it comes
big.
to small stuff like 4 line and 3 line, you can get a lot of extra stuff out of there. So Hamilton's did a really nice. Hamilton's was very efficient in their use of wood. As a matter of fact, as printing industry changed, they, I would say, streamlined their process and developed ways to be more efficient. So they changed the way they processed this wood. It used to be, they used to use
Oh,
that
yeah,
stuff?
linseed oil.
Linseed oil. And they stopped doing that in the 1960s and went to just using shellac and alcohol mix. And they also in the 1960s stopped using kiln drying and went strictly to air drying because they found out that the kiln drying left more cracks, and air drying.
The heat was too fast,
Yes,
maybe?
and the
Yeah.
air drying was less cracking, which meant they had more usable wood.
And
So,
isn't that also why they would harvest it in the winter? Because it's drier then, it's colder and it's drier? Or that's when they would half round it?
I think they harvested in the winter because it had a lot of, I don't know. I want to say it's because it had a lot of moisture in it, because if it got too hot out or too dry, they would take a hose to keep the log wet. So something about that moisture and then the drying out process.
Drying too fast or
Yep.
too slow.
All right, so we touched a little bit on the getting the wood ready. And then it's, it's sawed to line, which you'll find out later in this video. But before that, we talk a little bit about patterns. It is patterns that we use to create wood type. We have all the drawers that we have here, if somebody wants a pan, are filled with patterns of varying sizes. In general, they would start, when they got a new order in for a pattern, they would start at a 12 line, I'm sorry, not 12 line, a 72 line pattern, which is, they would start at a 72 line pattern, which is 12 inches, and then they would take that 72 line pattern and they would put it on their Pantograph platform, and they would cut ever smaller ones. So, but this is kind of a bad
That's huge.
bad sample.
Why?
But we can talk about this one.
48.
In this instance, this box that was magically put in front of us here, they didn't start with a 72 line pattern because you can tell that this, with these little nails here, this pattern was actually cut on the scroll saw at I think that's 36 line, right?
48.
This is 48?
Yeah.
So this pattern was cut as a 48 line on the scroll saw and then affixed to this backer board. And then from this pattern, they went ahead and turned around and cut this pattern. Let's see, what size is this one?
I'm guessing 18. Oh, 17 and a half.
Okay, well, 18. So 48 to 18 and a half. What's that ratio?
George, really? Come on.
Come on. Let's see. 18.
Seriously?
9,
You're going to maths right now?
9. Wait, well, 18.
Can we just
divided by-
pretend it's like 48 and 18
Okay,
straight?
yes, whatever. All right,
Okay.
so anyways, this is a fraction. They probably put this one into the thing, they probably cut this one from this pattern here. And
See, this one's 18.
All right, well, this
Just
one.
saying.
So that is basically the process of pattern making, is that they would cut the pattern and they would make smaller patterns from that. And this is our pantograph. We will be showing how this is used in depth in just a few moments. But to explain a few parts on here, this is our router. The router comes from Hamilton's. It is an industrial grade router. It is air powered. We have an 80-gallon air compressor in the back. And this router runs at 50,000 revolutions per minute. It spins very, very fast and it cuts very, very smooth. One of the nice things with this router in regards to end grain maple is that if you think about end grain maple and the fibers up this way, the router goes through the fibers super easy. Whereas if you're using long grain, it has to cut through the fibers like this, and it's a much harder task for it to cut. And if you do use long grain maple, it tends to shred more. It has a lot more cleaning up to do. So anything else? Anything else you can think of that they might like to know?
I think we're ready to cut some type.
Okay.
Feels like it.
So we had this machine set up on a 1-to...
We did have it set up on 1 to 3.
All right, we had it set up on a 1-to-3 ratio, and we have some leftover
12.
blocks of 12, and I think we'll have David cut some more blocks of 12 for us, and he'll demonstrate that. So we're going to take so if we're going to do a half set, because we have this one a third set, a half set for a 12 with the 12-line block would require what size pattern?
24, I can do that math.
All right, so we're going to take a 24-line pattern and we're going to cut 12-line piece of type from that. And
Cool.
we will start that process right now. So let's go. Hey, David, we're going to be cutting a 12-line piece of type. So I was wondering if you could cut some wood for me. David, this tray is filled with type gauges. It's for cut to line. So we have 2-line, 3-line, 4-line, 5-line, 6-line, 7-line, and he's looking for the 12-line gauge. And there it is, and he's going to take it over to the saw, and he is going to cut us some wood that we can cut for from that 24-line pattern we pulled earlier. And then he's going to take that gauge and he's going to measure it to make sure it is what we need. And there we go. Perfect. You want to cut that one more and then we'll be ready to go. I want to mention that when we are cutting a whole font or whatever job we're cutting, it is important to cut all your wood at the same time so that if there's any variation in who this person is that's doing the sawing, at least the set that you're working on is consistent. Thanks, man. Woo. Okay, so Jen, we are setting up the pantograph now to cut the 12-line type from the 24-line pattern. So Jen has already found wedges to secure the pattern into the platform and the wedge to secure the block of wood into the platform. We're not going to secure them right now because as we're moving this machine around, you run the risk of breaking your router bit and you're bending your tracer bits. So the next step she's going to do is we're going to swap out the router bit, and she's going to kind of look at her pattern, and she's going to look at the what she thinks, like how much negative space has to be cleared out and how much detail she wants. And because the bigger the router bit, the more material can be moved quickly or quicker. So big, but not too big, I guess, in this case. But we can try that and see how that one works. Can I see that one? Just to see what it looks like here. Yeah, we can go ahead and try that one, see how that one works. I'm actually helping you on this end by holding this bar.
Well, thank you.
Did it seem like it was tight enough? So I don't want that thing flying out.
It did.
All right.
All right, and now that the router bit is in.
Okay, now we're going to take that out of there. Let's set that aside, set that over here in our first spot.
Okay.
Okay, so we're going to keep our patterns and our block loose yet.
Yep.
So now what's, yes.
Adjusting the router.
So the machine is set up for a 1/3 ratio right now, but we're cutting a 12-line out of a 24-line pattern, so that's a half set. So we have to take and move this router all the way down to that spot. And we have them marked pretty clearly, so that helps a great deal.
I got it into my gut too. Going for the half. That is a pretty big change from last time, from a 1/3 to a half.
Yeah.
And we decided it was
That
here,
thing,
right?
yeah.
Not there? Okay.
Whoops. There you go. That looks good.
All right. Okay.
Make sure that is extra tight because that thing spins and it vibrates, and you want to make sure that it's not going to loosen up.
All
Okay,
right,
next
now.
spot is,
The big bar. That was at a ratio of 1 to 2, and this needs to reflect the same thing.
right. So if you want to show them the stick, it's got all kinds of markings on it. We got an arrow right here, so it shows us where we are positioning it. And then we have markings on here which read 1524. I don't know, I can't read that. What does that say?
Something, 1523, what the heck?
Huh. And then we have a 1018, 815, 1/2, 818. So all kinds of markings on here to help us know where we're going to move this stick. So, or where we move this big bar, I mean. Anyways.
So it's a half, so that means it has to go in.
Right.
All right.
Whoopsie.
Did I knock something
Don't
over?
impale yourself on the...
Should I eat Wheaties for lunch?
Oops.
Is it too
So
far?
try and fit on this machine. It seems to be pretty tight. Bring it just a tiny bit more with this one. Right
Two.
there. That's good.
Okay.
I think. Or a little bit more.
I think it's a little off, yeah. Is that better?
Yeah, I think.
All
There'll
right.
probably be more adjusting needs to be done.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, now we are squaring.
Yep, you're gonna hold the pantograph and square it up to you, kind of mix. And then we're going to be moving our plates.
So this one would come this way.
I would say, yep.
You think that this far this way?
You don't have to go quite that far, because you're gonna make an adjustment on it anyways.
Sure. All right, leave it at there.
We can put our stuff in there. So check your pattern to make sure you put your pattern in the right way, that the lip on it is to the
left.
Okay.
Lip to the left.
All right.
You got it, and it's in the corner. It's not hanging out in some weird little extra space. All right. And then the test block of wood. Locking it in there.
All right, good. So now we're going to get heft.
Do we
And
want to
that
talk about
is-
what heft is?
Heft is that the tracer bit we're going to choose will deliver us exactly 1:2 ratio. And that is determined by your tracer bit. We're not even going to worry about the router bit at this stage. So she's going to do a couple of test cuts. Did we turn this on? So,
Yeah, I did it this morning. I
Okay.
did all the bleeding and stuff.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
All right, so she's going to do a couple of test cuts.
And your pair's down there.
Thank you, Mom.
What are you laughing at?
All right.
All right. Okay.
So let's kind of look at that with that cutting anyways. How deep is the,
Oh, that looks pretty deep.
I would say,
Looks deeper than what you usually
yeah,
cut.
it usually does, but we're not going to worry about that right now.
We'll set that later?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, just for these purposes, we'll not worry about that right now, but if we were going to cut a whole font, I would not want it quite that deep. But for right now, I think it's okay.
Yeah.
All right, so how do we measure that?
You're the voice and I'm the hands.
All right, so take your measurement on that one side.
And can you talk through why and where exactly it goes? Because I think that's important.
Well, we want to take the measurement right at the very tip of the,
Like you don't like it to slide down.
yeah, you don't want it to
be
slide
on the
down. We
top.
want to measure what we're measuring is actually the printing surface here. So if we go like this, you can see it very clearly is going wider than the printing surface. So we're going to make this a little bit smaller, and we're going to go kind of like this. Does that look better? A little bit wider? Does that look closer to the printing surface right there?
Yeah.
And this is where, over time, depending upon how different pantograph operators, fonts can differ from one cutting to another, that if they measure it in a different spot, then it's not.
Or if it's like not resting exactly on top and goes just a little bit.
Right, then next thing you know, this is wider than it ought to be. So we want this to be, so we measured it on this side here. We want to take that measurement on the same side here. So we're going to take it, and it's just 2 and 1, and that's like pretty dang close. Right
Because
there.
where our pattern was 24 and our type is 12, so the ratio of 2 to 1 is what we're trying to achieve.
Right, so we're trying to have this width here fit twice into here. And by golly, we are so dang close that I don't think we could find a tracer bit that would give us anything more precise than that.
Because that's where we'd go next, is what, probably a little smaller tracer bit?
It'd be smaller or larger depending upon if this measured too big or too small. So for a first try, it's like awesome.
Can I have a high five too? David got one.
There you go. Awesome. So we're gonna go with this tracer bit here. So we're gonna lock that in now. If you change anything on your settings, and that includes height of the router, if you change the router bit, if you change the height, you change the position of this bar, you change your tracer bit, it all affects.
If a butterfly comes in here and flaps its wings.
Yeah, pretty dang close. Thank you, Jen. Nice job. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take these pieces. You can see we have a lot of excess wood in between here. We're going to cut this off so we can give the pieces to David to trim. And we will save as much of this center as possible so that we can use it for another application. So we're going to take this thing and turn it. And I'm going to start it's always better to start too big than too small and to inch your way to the size that you want. And once we cut one letter like this, we can cut all the same letters. And that should be it. Here are our letters. Do you want to take these over to David?
Sure.
There we go.
Hey, David. These just came off the trim saw, and I know, I can see where I didn't really, in addition to the obvious things like the corners in there, I kind of got those a little bumpy, but.
That's fine, we'll clean that up.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
So my name's David Carpenter, and I'm one of the trimmers here at Hamilton. Once the type gets done at the Pantograph and gets cut to size, then it comes over to me, and I'm the one that finishes the type. The Pantograph, when it cuts type, the bit is always spinning, and so it's all things that it's cut are going to have kind of rounded corners. I need to go in and actually kind of make those corners have kind of sharp edges. As you know, with type, not everything has a rounded corner. You do want to have some kind of sharp corners in there, and so I have to go in by hand and do all of those. I also kind of look at the type, I inspect the type a little bit as I am cutting it to make sure that there aren't any defects that may have not been caught by the Pantograph operator. And so I have kind of multiple jobs over here. So there are a couple of things that I use to do my job. One of them is going to be a trimming knife. The trimming knife is kind of this odd shape, but it's one of the main tools that I use to kind of go in and actually cut those corners out of the type. Now when we hold it in a slightly odd way, because what we do is we hold it between our pinky and our ring finger, and then I just hold it in my palm of my hand like so. This is to kind of help with control. It's a little bit more, it gives me a little bit more control when I'm kind of pressing into those corners, and so I can make kind of more precise cuts. Now, as I go in to cut those corners, there are going to be several corners on like this piece of type that I actually have to cut out. You'll see on this 4, I have this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, and this one. So I have lots of corners I have to go in and cut out. I use the trimming knife to cut out a lot of kind of the bigger angles. So if it's a 90-degree angle or above, that typically is where I'm going to use the trimming knife, because it's a little bit easier for me to get in there and cut those corners out. Now when I do that, I use the trimming board. There are 2 sides to the trimming board. There's this sawtooth side here, and then there's this L-shaped side here. The sawtooth side is the one that I use mostly with the knife, and that's because I can put the type into that sawtooth and turn it whichever way I need to, and I can hold it steady that way. So here, I'm going to go in and start to cut out some of these 90-degree angle corners here. And you see I just hold it tight against that sawtooth, and I just press the knife into that corner and then press it up till I get to the apex of that corner. Then I turn it, and then I do the other side, and I press it up into the apex of that corner. Once I hit the apex, then I just flick out that little piece of wood that is left over. And you can see now I have a corner here as opposed to this rounded corner there. And that's what I'm looking for on all the parts of my type, is make sure that I have corners in all the parts that need to have corners. And I'll do that to kind of all the pieces. There we go. And now I have all 4 of those corners cut. And you might be able to see the difference there, where this has sharp corners, this one has rounded corners. And that's going to be one of my main jobs, is to get those corners into the type. Now there's another way that we do this. Using the knife to cut out the corners is great, but sometimes these corners are going to be very, very sharp. They're much more of an acute angle. And because of that, it's harder to get the knife in there. And so for those, what we end up using are what's called punches. So here, you can see this punch is cut to a very specific angle. If I have a piece of type that matches exactly that angle, I can take this, line it up with that corner, and just pound it in and just depress that wood. And that gives me a very, very clean and a very, very sharp corner to kind of play with. We have lots of punches here that are all cut to different angles. And so you can see these are much bigger angles. Here's a very, very, very tiny angle. They're all made to be different sizes, so that way I can line them up with different kinds of type, because all type has different corners to it. One of the things that was interesting about moving the museum is that when we were moving the trimming station, some things that we thought may have just been trash or things on the ground were actually tools that the original trimmers had actually made for themselves. A lot of our punches are made from just an old nail. So what looked like it was just an old nail on the ground would actually been ground down to a specific punch for a very specific piece of pipe. And so moving the trimming station made for a very kind of interesting experience, because we weren't sure exactly, you had to just kind of pack everything up. You weren't sure if it was a tool or if it was just kind of something that was on the ground. So for punching, what you basically have to do is, this is where we're going to use the L side of our board. Because for this, what I do is I take the type and I press it up into that corner. And then for this, I actually have to then line up that punch to be exactly where I want it to be. And I'll get my trusty hammer. And this takes for a very steady hand. Once I have it lined up, nope, gonna punch it again, didn't go all the way down. There we go. Now you can see here that I have a very sharp corner that is now punched into the wood. It's a lot faster to do it that way, but in the same token, it's a lot faster to ruin the type, because if I just slightly tilt it, it's going to have a wrong angle there that I may be able to clean up, but it may also punch into the wood, and I may have to then fix that later, or have the pantograph operator cut a new piece of type. Now, once I have all of the corners cut on a piece of type, the other thing that I also have to do is clean up the surface. As printers, you may know that you have to clean your type, and the cleaner the surface is, the less areas there is for ink to actually get caught into that. And so what we're looking for with that is just kind of a nice smooth surface. So I have a lot of small files that I'll use, and I'll just go in and start to kind of file out some of those little bits that may have been left over from the pantograph process, just to make sure that it's a smooth surface for you guys when you are trying to clean your type. Out on the edge a little bit, and I'm just lightly pressing on it. I don't want to change the shape of the type at all, or change the size of the block at all. What I want to do is just kind of knock off some of those burrs. We have this brush attached to the side of our board, so that way if I need to, I can kind of brush off any kind of excess wood bits. But so then that is a finished piece of type that is then ready to be printed. This is the last stage, and so if I don't see anything wrong with the type, then it's ready to go. That's going to be a very printable piece of type at that point. And that's pretty much my job, is then I'll go through kind of all the type that is that gets made here. Once it gets done with the pantograph, it comes to me. Once I get done with it, it's ready to go be printed off in the world somewhere.
All that you've seen before, this is the type that we have produced. I mean, there is other stuff still sitting on the trimming table, but for this little tiny thing here, it's a very, I hope you've got the idea that it's a very long, complicated process. And I hope you guys enjoyed visiting us here in the wood type shop.